All right, good evening, everybody. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Bob Bruner. I am the exotic forest pest educator with the Department of Entomology at Purdue University. This is a part of our Report Invasive YouTube series that I've been running. You all have the benefit of coming to the live version of it. And for those of you who are watching the recording, please feel free to add any questions in the comments below the video. Tonight, we are going to be going over a different topic than we normally do. A lot of the invasives that I have already covered have been ones that are already present in our state and already have an impact on our lives as Hoosiers. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about one that we have yet to see, really. It has been detected here in Indiana, but it has not yet been detected in such a way that says it is now actually having an impact. It's only been cited, so to speak. And this is thousand canker disease, or TCD. This is a disease that is making a huge impact on black walnut throughout the state, or throughout the country right now, not the state yet. And unfortunately, we live in an area where we have a lot of black walnut, and there is an active timber industry that revolves around black walnut. So we're going to talk about this so you know what to look for when this disease does eventually arrive here, if it arrives here. So a little history on this. So TCD was originally recognized in 2008 when it killed black walnut throughout the western United States. What happened was it originally comes from the southwest portion of the states, and it began to rise up through that area as the vector for TCD began to expand its range. Now, this obviously has a lot of major impacts with it. Our black walnut trees are a major part of our timber industry. For those of you who aren't involved with it, black walnut board links are veneer wood. They can be very, very high price items. They will go for quite a bit, and they grow very readily. So they make a great thing to develop if you are interested in timber, and often people who are planning retirements and things like that may plan those retirements around developing trees intended for timber, particularly black walnut. Now, when it comes to the disease itself, all walnuts are susceptible to TCD, to thousand canker disease. However, black walnut is really the only species where this disease is a death sentence. Black walnut will almost never survive getting infected with this. Now, I keep referring to it as a disease, but in reality, this is a disease complex. This requires several steps to be completed before infection actually occurs and the tree begins to experience a problem. When we typically think of things, most plant diseases that we deal with, they're fungal diseases. And this is true also for TCD. It is a fungal pathogen. However, unlike other fungal pathogens, it is extremely reliant on an insect vector. So a lot of pathogens will spread through the air. Spores will get spread by wind or splashing water. This is why we ask gardeners to plant their plants with a good distance between them so water splashing won't transmit disease and things like that. This particular disease, though, it needs that insect, the walnut twig beetle in this case, to be able to spread that around. Now, what's particularly interesting about this too, and why this kind of comes into my wheelhouse as someone who specializes in invasive species, is that this beetle is actually endemic to the Southwest United States. It's not invasive, but it is considered invasive as it has moved throughout the rest of the country. So it's not something that came from a place like Asia or somewhere else. It came from here. And then it just started moving into new ranges. And unfortunately, it has carried this disease with it. Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, this disease is a fungal pathogen. It is named Geosmithia morbida, and I may refer to it as G morbida throughout the presentation, or I'll just refer to it as TCD. Now, what it does is it will invade portions of the plants that carry nutrients. So this is very much like other fungal pathogens. Like if you've been in a master gardener class, or if you've been to one of my other programs, you've heard me refer to things that are like this. Fungal pathogens tend to invade the vascular system of a plant and block them up. That will restrict that plant's ability to carry nutrients throughout it, and it'll make a major hit to its health and potentially kill it. Now, what thousand cankers disease does is it does this very thing by forming a lesion around its initial infection site. And these lesions, referred to as cankers, can bleed really heavily. They can stain the wood. And over time, the lesions will grow larger and larger in these funny oblong shapes. And eventually they'll connect with each other. And they'll create this really dangerous situation for the plant where all of a sudden it's now getting girdled because it can't transport nutrients through those cankers. And this picture right here kind of tells the story of it. Now I'm going to have several pictures throughout here. I wasn't able to get a label on all of them. If you recognize a picture that belongs to someone, please feel free to let me know so I can make sure I properly attribute that image. What you're seeing here are the lesions that are underneath the bark of a black walnut tree. And you'll note too that in these lesions, there are little pinprick holes that you can see. What you're looking at here is this is where the walnut twig beetle has bored its way into the wood of this tree. And the infection begins to develop around that spot where that beetle has done its activity and has bored through there. So this is a little bit of what I've already talked about a little bit, but basically what you're seeing is those cankers begin to coalesce and begin to restrict the nutrients in there. Now, a lot of tree species that get infected with this, they'll be able to survive it. They'll be weakened, their health will be compromised, they may lose some canopy coverage, but they'll survive. Black walnut, however, has the misfortune of being extremely susceptible to this, and they will normally die within 3 years after you first observe signs of infection. Now here's the rub. Note how I phrased that. First observed signs of infection. What that means is that the walnut tree could have been invaded a year or two beforehand, and the infection could have been developing. Because what you're looking at in this picture, going back a moment, is you're seeing what's underneath the bark. Someone came along with a hatchet or something and scraped away the bark so we could see the cankers. It's not immediately evident on the surface of the tree itself. This is creating a really nasty situation where being able to watch out for the disease means that we have to find trees that are already showing signs of sickness, scrape away the bark and confirm that that's what the diagnosis is. So we're already having to wound a tree that's most likely already showing signs of being sick. And that's not a good situation to get a healthy tree out of. So of course, the big thing that comes up then, is there another way to try to figure out if this disease is present? You know, we've got to have a better method that doesn't require wounding a tree. Unfortunately, we don't have many. So what we need to do is we need to do a little monitoring. We want to check midsummer for yellowing of leaves and upper branches. Trees will often experience some crown death with TCD. And those effects may be exacerbated by drought. But also, if you remember a couple of years back when we had some drought conditions often involved yellowing of leaves around midsummer and crown death. So it makes it really difficult to tell if there's a disease or if the plant's just stressed by external conditions. Now, as an infection progresses, you're going to see more limb death throughout the tree, and you'll see what's called adventitious growth. So for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, what that is unusual or not intended growth in different parts of the tree where you would normally never see branches or something growing out of. This means that the trunk, lower portions of the trunk, will suddenly start sprouting limbs because they're trying to find spots where there's no nutrient restriction, those nutrients can go. You may even see limbs begin to develop out of near surface roots. So those are very, very good examples of adventitious growth. And you've probably seen that before in other trees that have been sick. You can also try to look for those pinprick holes with dark coloration around them as the canker begins to bleed and it looks really nasty. The trouble is, and I'm going to show you this a little bit more here momentarily, is that the walnut twig beetle that does this is very, very small. And it's challenging even for me, someone who's an entomologist who's been working with bugs for a decade now or more. So here are some examples of what this can look at. And I'd like you to look at that image on the right all the way over. So that was taken by an entomologist named Whitney Cranshaw, who is just absolutely wonderful with the pictures that he takes of insects and the issues they cause. And you could see here in these trees, there's adventitious growth on the trunk of the tree that's closest to us. You can even see X's marked on it. So that means that whoever is looking at this tree, they have marked it for removal because they know it's infected. And you could see that there's quite a bit of limb death going on there. This tree is absolutely infected with TCD, and it undoubtedly will not survive the experience. The other two images are showing you what some of those cankers look like as you find them. So the one in the middle, this person has scraped away the bark, and now all of the lesions have begun to coalesce together and restricting nutrient movement. The lighter areas are the actual healthy wood. The darker ones are entirely affected by this infection. The image all the way over on the left is a tree that's got an infection going, but they had to scrape away, and you can see the green wood underneath there. And you could see all the pinprick holes where the insect has bored its way into the wood, and it carried the pathogen on its body into the wood. And here I should have done this a moment ago. I'm just highlighting some of those for you so you could see the pinpricks a little bit there. And you can get an idea of what that insect does, as well as what the crown of the tree looks like after it's been infected for some time. Okay, so I've talked a bit about that disease now. Now, what I want you all to do is I want you to take your minds back to, you may have been in high school or college, and you may have learned something about the disease triangle. Hopefully a few of you remember, and a few of you are master gardeners, I really hope you remember. The disease triangle is a description of how diseases can start, particularly in plants. This doesn't apply to mammals or animals. We tend to have complex immune systems that can protect us, and we can move around. Plants generally don't have complex immune systems. They have external protections that prevent things from getting in. They have bark and they have hardwoods, etc. And plants cannot move from an environment. So this triangle will apply to them because they're fairly static in that sense. So here's the deal with the disease triangle. Here's why I'm bringing it up. In order for a disease to spread, there has to be 3 things present. And if any one of these things is not present, there will be no disease infection. So what they are is a susceptible host, a pathogen that is capable of infecting that host, and an environment that's suitable for infection to take place. Now, like I said, if any one of those is missing, the disease spread is not possible at all. And I want to make sure that I state again, this only applies to phytopathology. It only applies to diseases in plants because plants can't run away and they don't have that kind of immune system to protect themselves. It doesn't apply to anything else. So let's go over what we have in our disease triangle. We have a host, Juglans nigra, the black walnut, very susceptible. We have our pathogen, Geosmithia morbida, 1,000 cankers. But what's the right environment? I've been telling you this whole time that we require an insect vector to make this disease work, the walnut twig beetle. Well, the right environment is one that is going to support that beetle. And unfortunately, this particular little insect, it does really well in our environments. It's able to survive, reproduce, and move on to new trees. And we have plenty of black walnut to go around. Now, normally a fungal disease is going to rely on moist environments with a substrate that's good for growth to be able to develop. Well, when G. morbida gets into a tree, it's got that substrate right there. It's got the food it needs in the tree itself and the moist environment it needs. But it still needs that insect to spread it. It does not have fruiting bodies in places where it's going to be beneficial for the disease to spread. Instead, most likely, and this is me speculating, is that the fungus adapted to the presence of the beetle and they both evolved together to act as disease vector and disease partner. The beetle, of course, is an unknowing partner in this process, but still the effect is there. So that means that the environment that's going to be best is one that's going to support the movement of the insect. And as we begin to warm, as climate change continues to make impacts, that means that the insects are going to get in more generations. It's going to have a longer season with which to move, and that means that the disease will continue to spread, unfortunately. So I'm going to focus on the part that I like the most, talking about the insect itself. Walnut twig beetle represents a really big challenge when it comes to trying to control this disease. This beetle is tiny, and I'm going to show you a couple images here momentarily. It's going to demonstrate exactly how tiny it is. They bore into trees. They live little telltale pinprick holes in the tree, so you would need a hand lens to be able to see them with any reliability. The beetle will dig out galleries in trees to lay their eggs in, and they will feed on the inside of that tree. And when it feeds on an infected tree, the pathogen, the spores, get on its body. And then when it leaves, it goes to a new host and then infects that new host. And that's how that pathogen will spread. What makes this really kind of nightmarish is that males of the species will produce an aggregation pheromone. And what that is, it's a chemical signal that's intended to be shared between organisms. And that signal will tell both male and female insects, hey, I found food, everybody come here. So all of a sudden you have thousands of tiny little wood-boring beetles that are attacking a single host. That's already not a great situation for any tree. And then on top of that, they're spreading a pathogen to it. So a little bit more about our walnut twig beetle. Identifying this is a challenge if you are not an entomologist. I will be very, very honest about that. To most people's eyes, this is a very tiny little brown beetle. Now, as an entomologist, I can use a particular feature to identify it. So if you look at what we refer to as a pronotum, or that kind of hood-like structure that covers its head and kind of covers where you feel like its shoulders would be, there are 4 distinct ridges of setae or hair that we can use to successfully identify them. Beyond that, there are probably other ways to do so. However, you would probably need to be a very particular specialist in this insect to know what those are. Now, like a lot of our other wood-boring beetles, this guy is going to create galleries in wood, just like with what we saw with emerald ash borer. It's going to lay its eggs in those galleries, and the young will feed on the inside of the tree before they develop into their adult stages. Now, here's that size comparison I was mentioning. Look at that picture over there on the right. That is a cat flea. I don't know how many of you have cats. I have one, and I have dealt with cat fleas before, and they are tiny. This beetle's size, it actually looks a little bit smaller than the flea. So that is incredibly tiny to try to deal with. That is not a good situation if you're trying to identify what's going on with your tree. That's not even a good situation if you were trying to treat them, because when an insect is that tiny, size actually begins to matter when pesticides need to reach a target to be able to kill them. So already we are looking at a moment where control of the insect is going to be very challenging. Now, a little on this insect's life cycle. So this one is actually pretty straightforward. Unfortunately, it can get out 2 generations in a year. So what we see is that in late April, adults will come out of where they've been hiding inside the tree, and they're going to fly to branches of black walnut. And they're going to create new egg galleries. They're going to mate, and they're going to lay their eggs in them. The larvae will hatch probably after about 2 to 3 weeks, and then they're going to feed for another 4 to 6 and develop into their adult staging, eventually reaching their peak flight activity from July to August to produce another generation in that year. The second generation will then fly to new hosts. They're going to dig out new galleries, and then they're going to hibernate in those galleries. They're going to overwinter inside the trees. They're choosing a strategy that keeps them very, very protected, because trying to get at them inside that tree is going to be very difficult. It's going to be almost impossible to spray for them. So they're deriving a significant amount of benefit out of this. And each time they produce a generation, if they have been exposed to TCD, they're going to carry the spore of TCD with them to the next tree they go to. And like I said, they have an aggregation pheromone that can signal thousands of their siblings to come with them. So where does it come from? Why is it a problem now? I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Walnut twig beetle, it's most likely native to areas in Arizona, California, New Mexico, and that southwestern portion of the United States. And much like other invasives, in its native range, it doesn't cause much damage at all. And the disease pressure is not really present for the trees that it inhabits there. However, it has begun to expand its range into Western and Midwestern states. It is reached as far north as Oregon, and it has been identified in several states, including Indiana. And we have a lot of black walnut in the Midwest. Now, what's going on here for Indiana is thankfully not bad yet. Walnut twig beetle was identified in Franklin County 7 or 8 years ago now, back in 2014, and it came from both a trap and from logs at a sawmill. G. morbida, the actual disease pathogen itself, was also isolated. However, it was isolated from a native weevil species, Stenomymus pallidus. And this is the first time it's ever been identified on an insect other than walnut twig beetle. Now, this doesn't mean that this weevil is acting as a vector. We need more data to be able to confirm that. I wouldn't jump to a conclusion there yet. It was simply identified. Now, according to Indiana DNR, the combination of G. morbida and the walnut twig beetle has never been found on a living tree in Indiana. So that means that the disease is not established yet. It is not making an impact yet. We do not have an outbreak of it yet. I want that to be very clear. This information is for you to keep an eye out for things and to keep you aware of what's going on. And that's what I want you to take home tonight. Now, Indiana and several other states have enacted a quarantine, and some states have a quarantine concerning wood products coming out of Indiana too, since we have actually found the pathogen. Now, this means that any walnut material that is originating from or moving through a quarantine state are prohibited from entering Indiana. So prohibited items are going to include things like logs, firewood, chips, lumber, and nursery or scion wood. We have been telling you, and you've heard me state plenty of times at my program, please don't move the firewood. That is only becoming more and more important. I am begging all of you, please do not move the firewood. If you use any wood products, especially black walnut, use it where you find it. Don't move it around unless you have inspection help and all kinds of other things to assist you. Now, that doesn't mean that certain things can't come in, though. So the products that are allowed in are going to include nut meat, hulls, any kind of finished wood that lacks bark on it. So if you've got a board length of black walnut that looks great, I mean, you're good to go. And anything that has been kiln dried up to a particular temperature, and I apologize, I don't recall quite what that temperature is, but it also needs to have no bark and squared edges. So that means it's completely finished up. It's been heated and fired, and it is good to go. The insect cannot survive that, neither can the pathogen. All right, and here we have a map just to give you an idea of what the distribution looks like. So what you're seeing here is there are several states that have TCD confirmed primarily out west. Now we do see several states that reach through the Midwest all the way onto the East Coast where you do see TCD confirmed, but that doesn't mean that it's the actual disease outbreak like with us in Indiana. We just know that it's present here, but we don't have confirmation that there's any kind of outbreak at all. And then we also have states that have shown that a quarantine has been issued. And right now I'm guessing that that quarantine is probably simply going to grow. Obviously, Tennessee's kind of right in the middle there. We have no data for it. So I'm guessing they're probably going to put up a quarantine before too long goes by. This map, I should say too, is dated 2015. There's probably more up-to-date information that I just simply wasn't able to dig up. And if I find more, I will update the video as time goes on. Now we do have a question, will the disease affect seedlings of black walnut? That's a good question, and I don't have an answer to it yet. I don't think they would be that discriminate. They may prefer the adults because they may feel like they can get better galleries in adult trees, but that is speculation on my part. So I will look that one up and see if I can't find out if seedlings are also at risk as well. So what are our options? I've kind of painted a horror story for all of us here, and I want to try to give you ideas of what you can do or what's going on in our state and our Department of Natural Resources in Purdue and what we're doing to try to prevent the spread of this. So we see that the insect here has been expanding through our Midwestern states. We see that it's definitely going to arrive here at some point. And we know that it's been cited a few times, so that means its population is probably only going to grow within our state. We know that the walnut twig beetle is very small and it's going to use this host plant to act as its protection, like I mentioned earlier. What this is going to translate into is that insecticides are going to have a really hard time reaching the insect. This has been true for a lot of different insect species, and oftentimes the solution to that is to use a systemic insecticide to try to reach that target. But research is still going to try to figure out if that is going to be a good option in this case. Right now, we don't have a lot of good control options for the insect itself. We also don't know that any fungicides are having a major impact right now on Geosmithia morbida, the actual disease pathogen itself. I searched and I searched for the last couple of days to see what it is looking like right now in terms of fungicidal treatments. And unfortunately, I don't have any good news on that one. I have yet to find any information to say that fungicides are going to have any good impact on them at all. So we have a couple of questions as come up. So does our Indiana weather help to prevent the beetle from surviving our winters? I do not think that that is going to matter to them, unfortunately, because they overwinter within the tree. Trees have already developed their own defenses against freezing in Indiana winters. And those beetles are taking advantage of that. So they should be able to survive the winter pretty easily in black walnuts that they've dug out galleries. And then we also have someone asking, what about semi-related trees such as pecans? I have not found any information that says that the walnut twig beetle will go after pecans. So I don't think that's something we need to worry about quite yet. But like I said, I can also look at that a little bit, and I'm sure that the things are going to get updated as time goes on too. So what can we do? As of right now, our best option is to monitor. Keep an eye out for the insect or the presence of the disease. And I see someone is also asking, why isn't this an issue in its native range? So this is actually a really great question. I love addressing ones like this because I'm a fan of modern synthesis and other things that have to do with how organisms adapt to each other. So what you're looking at there is that most likely the plants and trees in its native range probably evolved with it, and they evolved and adapted defenses against that insect and against the pathogen that it spreads. There may also just not be quite as much black walnut down there for the disease to really take hold of and spread. There are other types of walnut in that area, and those aren't nearly as susceptible. Unfortunately, as the insect began to spread and move northwards and eastwards, there's significantly more black walnut, which are much more susceptible and gives the disease more chance to spread. Now, as for trying to monitor for it, you can try to check under the bark of black walnuts that already appear to be declining. If you're someone who's a little outdoorsy, you can use a hatchet to scrape away bark and check to see if there are any lesions in there or any boring holes or galleries. However, this means that you're looking for sick black walnut trees and you're going to be intentionally damaging them. It is for a good cause though, but it's something we could stand to monitor for. Now, infected trees, we can't save them. We do not have a means to cure this disease and to save the tree from dying from it. So most management initiatives that are going to come out of places like DNR are going to probably be geared towards preventing infections from spreading further and destroying trees that are already infected. If you recall the picture that I showed you a little ways back where you saw X's painted on the side of an infected tree, those X's were there to let crews know that this tree needs to be taken down. You cannot chip these trees and then use what you chip or anything like that because it will have pathogen in it, so most likely they will be burned. Now, who can we contact to report on this one? Normally, I would tell all of you to go to reportinvasive.com, but IDNR is asking that if you have questions to reach out to local nursery inspectors. I will also add to that, you can reach out to me. I can get you in contact with the nursery inspector who is local to your area. You can also go to the website below here, www.in.gov/DNR/entomology division-staff. That will take you to a place where you can see all of the nursery inspectors and what parts of Indiana they are located in. Now, those same nursery inspectors are also Indiana compliance officers. So if you are wanting to move walnut materials, either for your business or some other purpose, you can contact those compliance officers and they'll help you get started with the paperwork you need to have and let you know if this is something that you can do. Apologies. All right. And then, of course, I want to make sure that you are aware you can go to reportinvasive.com. I am working on getting stuff updated on this website so it will become a major base of information for you to go to find stuff about invasives. You can call the number up there, 1-866-NO-EXOTIC, to report anything that you find, whether it's this disease or another invasive insect like the spotted lanternfly you see there. And you can report things to EdMaps, Glidden, or email me at rfbruner@purdue.edu.